Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So we now have another exclusive look at Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power from Entertainment Weekly. And now we're getting a trailer or teaser tomorrow. All the media and marketing is building up now for this show, but I don't know who really cares too much about it because everything that they're showing us here. Emma Horvath's character doesn't exist in the books. Tamriel over here, the Queen, we'll get to her. She does not look like that. I'll be labeled for saying that, even though that's not what Tolkien wrote. Anyway, let's take a look at what this says. Wayne Yip will never forget walking through Numenor. The director was one of the many creatives who helped bring Tolkien's legendary island to life as a key location in Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. Opulent human kingdom had never before been depicted on screen, and the showrunners, who we've talked about before, we'll talk about again what they actually said about this show, worked closely with production designer to help sketch out every corner of the coastal capital. And also John Howe, I believe, was working on this, so he did the artwork for Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which made it look more Tolkien-esque, which is why, if you look in the trailer, in the teasers, it kind of looks like the city would look like something out of Lord of the Rings, but everything else that we're getting doesn't really look much like Lord of the Rings and doesn't sound like it either. But it wasn't until Yip stepped on the set that he realized the full scale and detail of the island. The crew had essentially built an entire seaside city from the ground up, stone by stone. Well, that's what they did for the sets for Rings and Hobbit. As he wandered through the narrow alleyways and past the ship docked in the harbour, he felt truly transported to Middle-earth. Let's get to the good stuff. It's that storytelling, that level of obsessive detail that anchors the Rings of Power. Well, it's a pity you didn't put that obsessive detail into what the books actually say. Well, what you can use out of the books. We know you can't use the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales. But what you can use, it'd be good if you could actually just describe the characters as they are written. But they're not written in the books that you're using, so you're using whatever you want to create whatever you want. So it's not Tolkien. Not only is the show an ambitious new chapter in one of the most beloved franchises of all time, it's not supposed to be a new chapter. It's supposed to be putting on screen what is written in the book as best you can to what it says in the source material. They're not doing that. It's also an uncertain swing, a pricey new saga that hopes to redefine fantasy television. Well, this is new fantasy television. It's just taking stuff that's been written before and just making whatever you want out of it for a generic fantasy series. With a reported price tag, we've covered that before, $1 billion, The Rings of Power stands to be the most expensive TV series ever made. More importantly, the series faces the scrutiny of millions of fans, all of whom have spent the last few decades poring over Tolkien's writing and rewatching that beloved Peter Jackson film trilogy, which does have deviations from the book. And the directors and the writers, producers actually explain in the appendices of Lord of the Rings, when you watch the DVDs, why they changed the characters and story arcs from the book to the movie. And it makes sense why they did that. But with this one, they're changing characters' descriptions from the books to put them on the screen here. Why? Because they want to keep up with today's current representation in film and art and media. It's got nothing to do with what's in the book. Entertainment Weekly is right where they say the millions of fans have spent more time poring over Tolkien's writing to make sure that the lore keeps up with the show, and we know it isn't. Because right here, this is supposed to be Tamriel, the Queen of Numenor. Now let me just show you the description of Miriel, this character, in the Silmarillion. So right here is the description of the character we just saw. Okay, and last of all, the mounting wave, green and cold and plumed with foam, climbing over the land, took to its bosom Tamriel the Queen, fairer than silver or ivory or pearls. Okay, fairer than silver or ivory or pearls. Well, that's definitely not the description in the book, but you don't want to say anything about that because you'll be labeled a racist. That devoted fandom is why Payne and McKay pondered every tiny detail on the Rings of Power. Well, technically they can't use the Silmarillion, so they don't have any detail to go off for Miriel, so they can use whatever they want, really. Because if you look right here, in a previous article we've covered many times before on what exactly is the source material, it says, we have the right solely to the Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, Appendices, and The Hobbit. And that's it. We do not have rights to the Silmarillion, which I just read you the description of Miriel, the Queen, who that character is supposed to be, Unfinished Tales, History of Middle-earth, or any of those other books. That takes a large chunk of lore off the table and has left Tolkien fans wondering how this duo plans to tell a second age story without access to those materials. Well, we know how they're going to take that second age material and use it in the story. They're going to take descriptions of characters and swap them for whatever current day ideology you want to use. I'll use another word for it. representation. You know what the funniest thing is? Saying this. It was one place that we were just laser focused on saying, we need to get this right. I can't sit here with a straight face and read these quotes. I just can't do it. How can you say this with what's just above, the picture just above? And I've got nothing against whoever this actor is, this person, nothing. It's the writers and the showrunners that are changing the story to put characters and actors that they want to represent for current day Hollywood or whatever. It's got nothing to do with the person here. It's got to do with the writers and the showrunners changing the story when they say, we need to get this right. And we pondered every tiny detail. It's never been seen before. People have some ideas of what elves look like or what dwarves look like and what those kingdoms might look like, but Numenor was in some ways a blank canvas. But people in Numenor were still described, and you change them. Numenor was like the Atlantis, because it sunk into the sea after they got too full of themselves, really. Tolkien describes Numenor as the greatest human civilization in Middle-earth's history, a beacon of knowledge and culture that influenced the rest of the world. However, hubris and ambition rot the kingdom from the inside, and the island is ultimately destroyed, falling into the ocean like Middle-earth's version of Atlantis. Exactly. What I just said. In some ways, the story of Numenor could be seen as a cautionary tale for the show itself. If the Rings of Power succeeds, it could rise to unprecedented heights, leaving a legacy that could endure for years to come. If it fails, it could instead go down like the doomed island itself, destined to sink beneath the waves. I think that's where we're headed. Now, this is supposed to be young Isildur. Haven't got a problem with him. I do have a problem with the character that they've created, which is his sister, which we'll see never existed. The Rings of Power isn't a direct adaptation of an existing Tolkien novel. No, let's see why that is. Because in a previous Vanity Fair article, McKay said, one of the showrunners said, the driving question behind the production, he adds, was this: can we come up with the novel Tolkien never wrote? Never wrote. So can we do what he never wrote? So exactly, this is what they're saying. Isn't a direct adaptation of an existing novel because they want to create the one that he never wrote. Instead, it's inspired by the author's extensive notes published into the appendices of Lord of the Rings after Amazon closed its multi-million blah blah blah. Because they can't use the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, History of Middle-earth, which covers all these time periods. So they've got to use just the letters and little pieces that Tolkien wrote and the timeline that Tolkien set out for the First and Second Age in appendices of Lord of the Rings. Despite their relative inexperience, Payne and McKay were lifelong Tolkien geeks, and their pitch centered on a story they themselves had always wanted to see on screen, the Second Age. Well, it's the way they wanted to see the Second Age on screen. We were not interested in doing a show about the younger version of the same world you knew, where it's a little bit of a prequel. We wanted to go way back and find a story that could exist on its own 2 feet. Yeah, that's what everyone was asking for. No one was asking for you to do Middle-earth in the First and Second Age. We wanted the show to cover the First and Second Age with Numenor, and even the First Age with the Elves in Valinor, but who knows what we're going to get with this. This was one that we felt hadn't been told on the level and the scale and with the depth that we felt it deserved. So you changed the characters, well, not really races, because races in Tolkien completely different than races in the real world, which is what they're trying to portray. You got to change somewhat the actor's skin color, because I don't know why. Just put what it says on the book, and you're creating characters that never existed. So how is that depth that it deserves? The island of Numenor is ruled by the Queen Regent Miriel, who we've described before. And this seemingly idyllic paradise is facing tensions of its own. Numenorian royals are human, but have elvish blood, and for years they've been friends with their immortal counterparts, yes. Over time, however, a schism appears, and some residents continue to pledge their loyalty to the elves and the godlike Valar, while others ponder a more modern, independent future and become increasingly afraid of their own mortality. Showrunners note that Tolkien never wanted his stories to directly echo real-world politics. Why are you changing the race of the characters, or the color of the characters, to insert your current-day political agenda into this show? And they feel the same way about it. No, they don't. Payne points out there's something deeply relatable and timely about the anxieties and political divisiveness racking this fictional island. There's a difference between in-universe politics, like between Numenorians and the elves. That's completely different to changing characters to fit current day agendas and in creating characters to fit current day agendas. Like giving Isildur a sister, which they describe here. But they're two different things. There's talking about real world politics, which you insert into the show, which you're doing, which Tolkien didn't want. And there's the political infighting between the Numenorians and the elves. That's completely different. Don't conflate those two, please. Tonally, so this is the tone of the show that they want. Tonally, we wanted Rings of Power to reflect Tolkien's main story points of friendship and good and evil. One of the ideas is, how far into the darkness are you willing to go to do the right thing? That's kind of like Aragorn going into the realm of the dead to see if he can get the King of the Dead to get them to fight in Return of the King. At Numenor's center is the royal Miriel, who is wrestling with how to guide the home she loves into the future. When it comes to playing a character that holds such a lofty position, I can't say that I necessarily relate to what it is to be a queen. But I think there's something relatable about how isolating that can feel and how you're grappling with things that no one else can really understand. So that's going to be Pharazôn, so he wants more power than he should have. Miriel is aided by her close counsel Pharazôn, played by that guy. Tolkien readers know him as one of the major players in Numenor's eventual downfall, yes. When you see the set of Numenor, it's like you're walking through Pharazôn's mind. When you see these epic statues and this wonderful masonry, you're walking through the mind of a person that's burdened by his own mortality and is very concerned about what legacy he's going to leave behind. So they want to get that character right, sounds like. Fortunately, Numenor also has hopeful allies like the seafaring Elendil and his son Isildur. The young Isildur is Aragorn's direct ancestor, and fans know he will grow up to face off against Sauron, slicing the rings off the enemy's hand in the introduction of Fellowship of the Ring. But for now, he's just a young sailor trying to find his place in Middle-earth. You know where he goes, but how does he get there? That's exciting about the show. You see Isildur as a young man at a crossroads. The actors caution that although you might know how their story ends, the journey can still hold surprises. There are signposts on the way, Owen explains, highlighting his regal mariner as a prime example. Ultimately, those of us who know the lore know Elendil ends up helping to lead the last alliance of elves and men in the beginning of Fellowship. But how he gets there? Tolkien hasn't written the man in 3 dimensions, and that's the gift of this show. Because you can't use all those other books other than Lord of the Rings, and because Tolkien didn't describe everything that Elendil did between point A and B, you're going to take that as an open letter to write the character that you want to write. That's the gift of this show, taking Tolkien's work and writing whatever you want. Now, right here, this is some of the dumbest stuff I've ever seen. This obviously looks like a Numenorian army. Yeah, lead the Numenorian army into battle. But Miriel, look at what she's wearing. What is this? What is this? Yeah, she's the only one that's wearing like full gold and all that. But what is this headgear? If she's wearing that, could you imagine a spear going into that and just whoop, like she's done? This is the dumbest thing ever. She could easily be killed, or at least very seriously injured, with just one blow to hitting that thing. And the horses here, I think Lady Gravemaster pointed out, some of these horses look like they're about to keel over. Now here's one of my favorites. One new character is Isildur's sister Arianne, played by Emma Horvath, who is this lady here in the red or orange, whatever. So that's Isildur's sister, okay? Invented for the series. There it is right there. Inventing female characters for no reason. This bright and ambitious young woman has dreams of being an architect. Horvath describes her as being on the cusp of womanhood. Oh, don't want to say that word. Don't want to get in trouble. Don't want to say she's a woman. Adding that she's still quite insecure and naive about the way the world works. Tolkien wrote that Elendil had 2 sons, Isildur and Anarion. At the start of Rings of Power, Anarion is off screen. When it came to inventing new details like Arianne, McKay and Payne say that they and the writer's room approached the task almost like historians, poring over Tolkien's work to excavate details and common threads they could weave into a larger narrative. Where does it say anything about a sister? You just created it. You're not historians poring over Tolkien's work to get details of what you can make. You don't even have his work that you can use for this time period. So you're creating things that never happened. So you can make this story that you wanted to tell, the novel that Tolkien never wrote. Now here's a perfect one. For fans worried about conflicting canon, I think a lot of people are. We're not worried about it. We know it's conflicting canon and this story is bullshit. McKay and Payne point to one of Tolkien's published letters where he wrote about wanting other minds and hands to create art in his legendarium. That doesn't mean you can go back and change everything about what's already been written. That means you can make whatever you want from stuff that's already been made. People who want to have their own idea of fan fiction, if they're fans of the stories and the Tolkien's work, they can be like, oh, I could imagine me as whatever, some character in this. Okay. But you're taking the story that you're supposed to be putting on screen so people can watch what happened. That isn't the same thing as fans wanting to create their own art. And it's also not taking the stories that he's made and then maybe branching off from that. You're recreating the story that he's made. Here's what the showrunners just said. They're talking about one of the letters that Tolkien published where he wrote about wanting other minds and hands to create art in his legendarium. Let's take a look at that actual letter and see what he actually said. I will draw some of the great tales in fullness and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole, and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. If we want to talk about pulling quotes and things to fit our own agendas, what they used is other minds and hands. That's it. It just says other minds and hands to create art. Well, here's what another line is above that. It should possess the tone and quality that I desired. Now, I'm taking that and this further quote, which I just read, as saying it should be linked to a majestic whole, yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. So he's saying people should create music about it, create art about it, and painting about it. Not taking the story that he made and changing characters and inventing characters to fit your own current day political agendas for current day Hollywood. That's not what he's talking about. You're taking other minds and hands, that's it, to say we're going to create our own thing. He didn't say that. He said create drama and art and music based off of what he's created, not make your own thing. We feel like we're taking up the gauntlet that he himself put down. He gave us what we like to say are the stars in the sky that we have to connect and draw the constellation in. That's not what he said. The diversity of the cast has also been scrutinized, because Tolkien didn't write that. For the first time, Middle-earth will be populated by multiple actors of color, which never happened, including those playing dwarves, elves, and more. I've already gone over the elves bit, where you see the guy who is in a relationship with a woman, that character that never existed. You can go check out all those videos in the Lord of the Rings playlist. It's a decision that's been key to the show's DNA from the start. Then it's not Tolkien. And addai-robinson says to complain about that diversity would be to go against the very spirit of the source material. Your character is described as fairer than ivory. So she's saying the fans going against diversity in the series would be like going against the source material. Your character in this series goes in contradiction to what's described in the source material that you're not even able to use. I can't believe that. You've got actors in this show complaining about the diversity would be to go against the spirit of the source material when her character in this show goes against the description of her character in the source material. That's disgusting. Tolkien explores many themes, but one of them is the idea of people of different ethnicities, backgrounds, and walks of life coming together for a common cause. Yeah, elves, dwarves, men, all different races. These are different actual races. We're all humans, we just got different skin colors. For me personally, as a viewer, I would have the expectation that the show would reflect the real world as well as the world I aspire it to be. Then we're not talking about a fantasy series, we're talking about taking a fantasy series that has already been written, has already been described and written about in multiple books and stories, and you're taking that to reflect the real world. So it's not Tolkien. No, legitimately, would you be saying the same thing if Tolkien was a black writer and every character was black? But it's made in the 1930s, and now in 2022 we need to reflect more characters and more people of different colors today, so we need to make a historically black character in a fantasy series white. Is that okay? Is that reflecting the real world? Or is it only because it's a white character? Or it's a fantasy character. It's not even white in the sense of white. This is ridiculous. You're taking fantasy characters that are described as being fair-skinned, but you want to be the character and you're not fair-skinned, but that's okay because it's 2022 and it's okay to have current political ideologies reflecting the real world in fantasy series that have already been written nearly 100 years ago. This is terrible. This goes against everything that we should want to see for a fantasy series, that adapting a story. World as you aspire it to be. What if it was a story where the world ended? Basically, that's what happened. Your world ends in this show. You die in the story when Numenor gets sunk. So is that the world you aspire to be? You die as the world ends? This is ridiculous. That quote is really disappointing. This woman right here, Cynthia Addai-Robinson, is happy that she is a character that's described as fairer than ivory because she's representing what's happening in the current day. Even though it's a fantasy series, then it's not Tolkien and it's not the story that you're portraying. It's just some generic fantasy series that's been created to represent people who never existed in this series, this story. And this was the fear that we had going into this, that they were gonna take characters that were described as being how they were, like elven-like, and they're gonna make them race swapped for current day narratives. And That's exactly what they've done, and these people who are in the show are championing that. Off screen, the cast bonded, quickly united by the top secret shoot isolation in New Zealand at the height of the pandemic. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? The Numenorian actors still have a Numenorians only WhatsApp group chat. Well, that's very diverse and inclusive of them. Early on, Baldry and Horvath did some brother-sister bonding by bungee jumping and ziplining together. Yeah, but her character never existed in the books, but it doesn't matter because we're reflecting the current day on the screen. We're reflecting the real world as she aspires it to be. A lot of people are going to eat this up. They're going to say, this is amazing. This is greatest Tolkien series. That people who never read it, never watched the trilogies, take away The Hobbit even, never watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You're going to get stands who are 14, 15 years old watching this and saying, oh, look how amazing Galadriel, War Galadriel is. They're never even going to read the book. And if they did read the book, they'd be like, oh, everything's different. Why is it all different? I don't care. The show's amazing. This isn't what Tolkien wanted. This isn't what he meant. The two writers hope audiences embrace the second age as much as they have. No. Their goal, they say, was to craft a series that appealed to both hardcore fans, that's a fucking joke, who can order their morning coffee in Elvish, and newbies who don't even know what a ring is. Well, you fucked up there. It needs to feel the way you feel when you're in Middle-earth. It needs to pull you in and make you fall in love with the way you fall in love with these books. The books that you can't even use to make this story. Okay, if people come out of this feeling like they've gone to Middle-earth, that's such a special thing. Middle-earth fills us with hope and inspires us. There's a reason why people reach to Middle-earth when they're going through hard times. Because it's a timeless story that doesn't matter about current day political agenda and reflecting the real world in that story. It's a separate fantasy series that people can read, put themselves into the characters that's happening in that time in the book. It's not about, I want to see Muriel as a black woman. I want to see Isildur had a sister. What if they did that story? No, people go back to the book because it's what the book says. And it's such an amazing story in its own right. And the people who do that are people like the ones making this show. Oh, what if I could see myself in the character? Why do you think so many people, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, everyone around the world loves this story? Not just because it's exclusively white. That's just ridiculous. It's because it's a transcendent story. Transcends all those things about the real world. And these people making this show who are inserting this and really wanting to reflect the real world are just going against everything of what was written. Everything that the people have been reading for decades. As Tolkien put it himself, their quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Oh great, using Lord of the Rings quotes now. But even now there is hope left. Yeah, okay, good on you. Using a Fellowship quote. Amazon recently screened about 20 minutes of the show for a group of Tolkien superfans. Oh, that was the superfans video that we saw a while back, which got a lot of traction. And that was heavily edited, and everyone that was in there just wanted to be like these people. Oh, I want to see War Galadriel go off girl and all this shit. Like, come on, man. They're not super fans. They know nothing about it. As Payne and McKay hid in the back, they overheard one audience member say that the show felt like Middle-earth. Yeah, because they probably never seen Middle-earth before. As he said that, I was surprised by my own reaction. I spontaneously burst into tears. I was like, that's all I wanted to happen. Maybe Gandalf was right. Not all tears are evil. Oh god. That's all you wanted to have happen. People wanted to feel like it was Middle-earth. You can make the feeling like it's Middle-earth. You can get the best artists to create what it looks like John Howe made it look like Middle-earth. You can make anything look like it, but when you take characters that never existed, Isildur's sister, and characters that were described as being fairer than silver or ivory or pearls, to this, they are championing it, saying it's supposed to reflect the real world and as you aspire it to be. Well, none of this is Tolkien. I'm really super against this show. There's a new teaser coming out tomorrow. I really do not care anymore about this shit. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, share this video out there, and I'd like to thank my members at the 2 Towers level, Daniel James and Sir Straith. And we'll see you all in the next one.